Well, it's so good to be here, and I want to talk a little bit about a storm. I want to talk about a storm because I love a good storm. It's one of my favorite things. I love it. When I was growing up in southern Alberta, we had tons of these storms that would roll through. There'd be hail and thunder and lightning, and I would always be out on the front porch with my dad going to look at it and just kind of marvel in it all. But I do think there's something special to be said about a storm, that it's cool to marvel in it, and it's really cool to watch when you're safe. But when you're in the middle of it and you're not safe, it's absolutely terrifying. It's terrifying to be in those moments. And there was one time that I can remember where I actually almost died at the hands of a storm. It was at a church campout, and what a church campout was when I grew up is we would actually cancel church for the weekend, and we would go out on a Thursday night and stay until Sunday, and we'd have church there at the campsite all together as the church. And this isn't like a small campsite. Like, we'd rent out like a group campsite for like 200 people, and we'd all roll up in tents and RVs and everything, and we'd be there for the whole weekend. And it was an awesome experience, but being in southern Alberta, there was always a storm that rolled through at some point during that weekend. And I remember one year in particular that this storm just rolled through. We were out watching it on the lake, and we saw these clouds out in the distance. And they were big clouds, and we were just looking at it like, wow, that looks like a really big storm. And we kept saying, it looks like it's getting bigger. Oh, it looks like it's coming towards us. And as it was coming towards us, we're like, hey, we should maybe just like go like get stuff ready or pack something else. It looks like it's gonna hit us. We don't know how big it is or anything. And we went to go pack stuff up. It was around 6 p.m., so everyone was having dinner. And literally within like 15 minutes, this storm made it, and there was hail everywhere. We were getting just pummeled with hail. So people were taking cover, taking what they could grab, everything. It was just panic and just getting under cover. And then once we got under cover, we realized this wasn't going to slow down anytime soon. So a lot of people had to go back out and like actually pack things up, their dinner and everything else. So I forgot my bag outside. I remember I went outside from my tent that I had pitched in the middle of these trees and in the forest and everything. I went out to the main campsite and I looked, and there was like the fire was blowing sideways. There was like tarps flowing everywhere. There's ropes and ties, everything. It was just absolutely like a post-apocalyptic scene. It was ridiculous. And I remember when I went back to my tent, and I went in there, and the wind was howling, and the hail was coming down, that at that moment I remember thinking, I'm like, I'm in the middle of the forest, and I had the bright idea to put my tent out into the trees where nobody could see me and knew I was here. Like, if a tree fell right now, would I survive? And would anybody know if I didn't? And I had this serious thought. Now, obviously, I made it through it. With no injuries. My tent did take in some water, but we made it through it. But I remember being absolutely terrified in those moments. And now storms, they can cause a lot of damage like that. But they can cause even more damage when you're actually out on the water. Say you're in a boat, for example. If you're out on the water in a boat, that can be a terrifying thing where you're at the mercies of this storm. And these storms can cause a lot of damage, but I think it can be even more terrifying when you're out on the water stuck in a storm on a boat. And now when a boat is stuck in a storm at sea, that there's really only two things that happen: danger and misery. And when danger happens, there's legitimate dangers like capsizing or damage to the boat that can happen, to the vessel that could render it non-functional. And when a boat suffers damage, or it loses power, or runs out of gas, or it suffers damage where it would render it unusable, where it can't move anymore, there's a term that they use. It's called dead in the water. Called dead in the water. And it's often referred to as this, and it's when sails, they aren't sailable, that you're not able to raise them or anything, you can't use them, the motor runs out of gas or any other reason, but the boat is stuck and it's dead in the water. And I think there's lots of things you can do. There's a lot of different tactics you can use when you're in this scenario in a boat and you're dead in the water. And you can look it up what those tactics are if you're interested. But there's lots of things that you can do to survive those moments. But one of the biggest things that you need to be careful of is don't let yourself sink into misery. Or if you have a crew that you're responsible for, that you don't let your crew sink into misery. Because when you let misery overtake you, it can actually cloud your decision making. And it can decrease your chance of survival. And this is why that people, they will actually try to escape their misery, thinking that will actually help them escape from danger, but it's actually going to force them to go into more danger as a result if they're not careful. So for example, if there's a boat with a captain, and this captain is trying to keep his crew safe in the middle of this storm, and they're dead in the water, and they're just trying to make way and just trying to survive, and they're in this situation, The captain will do his best to make the best decisions possible to keep the boat and the crew safe. And the captain will do his best to do this, but it can become tiring. I don't know if you knew this, but there's but 1 cubic foot of water weighs 64 pounds. So imagine like water after like the giant waves you would see out on the open ocean just washing upon a ship deck. Like that can get tiring to be with. If a wave hits you or anything like that, or water washes under your feet, so many things can happen, but it can get absolutely tiring, demoralizing, and you can sink into misery. So the captain's responsibility is twofold: to mitigate danger and to uplift the crew's misery and uplift them out of misery. Because if he fails to manage the misery, he will fail to mitigate the danger, because the misery has the potential to actually cause more danger. Now, if the misery overtakes the crew, they may choose to actually head for shore in hopes that they might actually escape the danger, which seems like almost a reasonable thing to do. And you might even see a port or with a lighthouse that you think that might be a good place to go. But I looked into this, and there's only certain ports that are actually good to go to in the middle of a storm, because they need to have high enough walls so that wind doesn't come in. And if you actually go for the shore, you actually run risk of having your boat run aground and sinking the vessel along with the crew. So you actually put yourself at more danger by trying to go to shore. So the best thing to do is to stay in the storm and try to ride it out, which is why it's so important to manage that misery and just, as a captain, say, it's only going to last a few hours. We will make it through this, and just managing that. Now, I think you and I, the storms we face aren't the same as a real storm out there, but I think they feel, if not more, terrifying sometimes. They can be equally terrifying, and they can leave us feeling dead in the water, like we're stuck or we're without power, without control, at the mercy of the wind and the waves. And they're things that are very real things we struggle with, like unemployment, that we struggle with things like social isolation or mental health even, or even just the uncertainty of our health sometimes. And these are things we wrestle with, and we try to be in control. We try to hold it together. We hold it together for ourselves, hold it together for those that are around us, and try to just maintain control and make sure everything's okay. And we keep trying to just do the right thing and hold that ship together. And we keep saying, I'm okay, I'll be all right, I'll make it through this. But inside we know that we're dead in the water. And we don't know what to do. And nobody prepared us for this. Nobody prepared us for that moment. But if we fall into misery, we will make decisions that will only make it worse, which is when it begins to start spiraling down. So what do we do in this situation? What we do is, when we're dead in the water in your middle of the storm, what do we do? And you can type this in the chat today. That's the title of today's message, is Dead in the Water. You can write that in the chat. But we're going to look at a story in the Bible here in just a moment, in Matthew chapter 14, if you could turn your Bibles there too, where a group of men, Jesus' disciples, they were in a similar position. They were dead in the water. They were stuck. They were isolated, and they were powerless in this moment. And they were at the mercy of the wind and the waves. And I believe that God wants to show us today what we need to do when we're dead in the water. And if we do this one thing, I believe we will see a miracle happen in the middle of our storm. So I want you to watch closely as we look at this story. We're going to read this story together, but I want you to look closely, and we're going to get back into it again. But I want you to watch closely, because something is going to happen, and it's going to change your whole perspective of this story when you read it. So I want you to put this in chat. Don't miss the miracle. I want you to look for the miracle. Don't miss the miracle. I want you to tap your co-watcher on the shoulder and tell them that. Don't miss the miracle. Look carefully at the story, and don't miss the miracle. Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 22, it says this. It says, immediately he made the disciples, this is Jesus, he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side. Now while he dismissed the crowds, after dismissing them, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Well into the night he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat was already some distance from land, battered by the waves, because the wind was against them. Jesus came toward them walking on the sea very early in the morning, and when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, and they said, it's a ghost. They cried out in fear. And immediately Jesus spoke to them. He said, have courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Peter said, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. Jesus said, come. And climbing out of the boat, Peter started walking on the water, and he came towards Jesus in this miraculous moment right now. But when he saw the strength of the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand, caught hold of him, and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those in the boat worshipped him and said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And there's three things I want to point out that stand out here to me. The first is that Jesus, he made the disciples get into the boat. He made them get into the boat. And why would he do that? And then why would he not go with them? Why would he not go with them? Why would he just leave them alone? He doesn't do this in almost any other part of the story. He usually sends them out to go off on their own for some mission or something, but he's usually with them. So why would he send them out alone? We need to understand this part is of a larger story that's unfolding here. And just before Jesus, he actually multiplied the bread for the 5,000. You might have heard that story before. And he fed everyone. And John 6 adds a helpful little anecdote for this story that helps us understand kind of a bit of the backstory of what's going on, because John was a disciple who was there in that moment. And this is what John witnessed, and he said this in John 6:15. It says, "When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself." So these people were trying to make him king. And the disciples, they would have shared this same sentiment of wanting to see this Messiah be made king and reign over Israel, or reign over Caesar and overthrow the Roman government and all of these things. They wanted to see this because they were imprisoned by the Romans. They were enslaved. They were like, I want to get out of this misery that we're in, where we're just this subject to this authority around us. We're subject to the government and all the choices they have to make. And no, we're not talking about 2020 or 2021. We're talking about 0 AD or 33 AD. We're talking about back 2,000 years ago, where they were just frustrated with the government and said, "Jesus, you need to come back and take control. You need to take control." And they were sharing the sentiment, but they were missing that Jesus was already king in a much larger sense. He was king over everything. And I imagine that Jesus wanted to protect the disciples from being indoctrinated to the crowds to almost this small thinking idea of kingship, of Jesus being king of only the earth or only of people, but over all of creation. He wanted them to realize this. He didn't want them to buy into this small idea of his kingship. So he sends them out on the boat into the Sea of Galilee because that's safer than staying on the shore. That was what he was worried about. So what I want us to remember this, that what we may consider safe isn't necessarily safe to God. What we may also consider dangerous isn't also necessarily dangerous to God. And we need to keep that in mind. The disciples, they go in the boat on the water, and Jesus stays back to order the crowds away. And he goes and he spends time alone in prayer. Presumably, we think that he's going to join them on land. He's going to journey with them on land. That he would kind of walk around the Sea of Galilee and meet them on the other side. That was kind of the hope. That's what we kind of assumed that Jesus' plan was. Now, if we keep watching, I don't want you to miss the miracle here. So we're going to keep going. It says the Sea of Galilee, it was surrounded by these hills. There was all these hills on the outside of the Sea of Galilee. And it's on these hills where Jesus, he went up and he prayed, and he was overlooking the Sea of Galilee. And it says in some translations that he was there, he prayed until the fourth watch of the night, which in the Roman government was known as like 3 to 6 in the morning. So Jesus went up on this mountainside and was praying well into the night. Prayed well into the night. And he was praying there, thinking, I can only imagine him praying and thinking, contemplating what he had just witnessed. This crowd of people trying to make him king. The multiplication of bread, how those people, they were fed physically, yet they were perhaps maybe lacking spiritually. How he knew that his body was going to be broken and eventually feed everyone and all of humanity. And he probably contemplated this idea. He contemplated how the people wanted to make him king, and that they would, by declaring him king of Jews in his death, they would do that. But it would actually be realized at his resurrection. And he was consulting with the Father probably about his further ministry. What does the next year look like? What does this future look like? What will you have me do? What is the next thing? And he's consulting about what this is going to look like, so that people can experience blessing and everlasting life. And he was contemplating on how the people, they sought almost by force to make him king. After hours of prayer and contemplation and thinking about these things, he gets up at about 3 a.m, and he gets up. And what's really cool about this story in this moment when Jesus, he gets up and prays, is that this is actually during the Passover as well. And during the Passover, we know that the moon, it lights up the sky. So it's actually lighting up the Sea of Galilee. So when Jesus gets up, he's actually able to see out on the water on the Sea of Galilee. He sees the boat. He sees the disciples on the boat as he looks down there at 3 a.m. And in this moment, He sees his disciples. He sees the future of the church. He sees his close friends. He sees people that he loves. And he looks at them and he sees them dead in the water. He sees them struggling against the wind. He sees them not making any headway. And he sees them in this moment, trying not to capsize. And I want you to imagine the unimaginable sorrow that he might have felt for them, and looking to them, and his longing in his heart for them. Now, what I think is so interesting about this is I think we presume that Jesus, I think we can all agree, we presume that Jesus can calm a storm from a mountaintop just as easily as he could from the middle of the water. I think we can assume that. But Jesus, he doesn't do that. He doesn't just calm the storm. He actually goes out on the water to them. Why would he do that? The disciples, I can imagine they must have been filled with some doubt. That they would have asked, why would he make us get into this boat and go out ahead of him into the storm? Why would he do that? And if he is God, he would have known the danger ahead. He would have known there was a storm, and then he would have even the audacity to abandon us and not be here. We don't see him. He's not here. He just left us. The disciples were under the influence of seeing Jesus as the king only in an earthly sense, but Jesus wanted them to understand he was king in a much larger sense over all creation, over everything. So Jesus, he went out to them and he calmed. His concern was actually to calm the storm in their hearts more than the storm that they were facing. So I want you to put that in the chat. Jesus, he wants to calm the storm in your heart more than the storm that we are facing. That's his heart. And the disciples, they needed to see their captain. They needed to see the captain of their boat. They needed to know that they weren't abandoned. They needed to know that Jesus would protect them. And more than that, they needed to know that he was king over all creation, that he was king over the storm, king over their situation, over the waters, over their fears, over their circumstances. The disciples were dead in the water. They were without a captain to calm their nerves, to bring them out of their misery. So Jesus, he comes and he sees their struggle and danger, and he comes and wants to relieve that misery and uplift them. But I want you to keep looking. Don't miss the miracle here. It says, here's the last thing that I noticed. Jesus is walking on water, and Peter had a request. He said, Lord, if it's you, command me to come out to you on the water. And Jesus tells him to come. Peter steps out, and he's walking on water for a few steps, but then he sees the strength of the wind. He sees the strength of the wind. Have you ever looked at the storm you're facing and thought, it's too much to handle? This is too much for me to bear. This is too much for me to walk through or go through. I think we've all been there in some way. And we may call it doubt, fear, stress, being overwhelmed, probably a multitude of words you may have for that. But I think we feel weak and small as a result. But then, Jesus reached out his hand. Jesus reached out his hand. In the middle of Peter's doubt and his weakness and his frailty and vulnerability, Jesus reached out immediately, he says. He didn't hesitate, it was immediately. Jesus said, you of little faith, why did you doubt? They got on the boat, the storm stopped, and the disciples understood and they worshiped him, that he was not just this earthly king, but he was the Son of God. He was the king over all creation. So I want to ask you now, did you miss the miracle? Did you miss the miracle here? There's a lot happening here, so I don't blame you if you did, because I'm not going to lie, I've read the Bible for over 12 years, and I missed it. I missed it until I was preparing for this message, and I saw it. But the miracle here is not that Jesus walked out on the water. The miracle is not that Peter walked on the water. The miracle is not that Jesus calmed the storm. And yes, those are miracles, and there's probably a lot of miracles here going on. There's a lot happening here, but I think there's one that stands out. The miracle is that Jesus, he reached out his hand to save Peter. He reached out his hand to save him. In the middle of his doubt, facing impossible circumstances, completely vulnerable at the mercy of the wind, he's dead in the water, he's not going anywhere. Doubting even that Jesus was in control, Jesus reached out his hand to save him. I don't know what storm that you're facing today, but I don't want you to miss the miracle that's in your storm. And here's what's wild about the disciples in the story. The disciples, they thought that they were abandoned. They thought that Jesus had abandoned them, but he was actually there the whole time. He was looking out on the water. He knew where they were. He knew they were safe in his hands, but Jesus knew that they had a bigger issue. They had a bigger concern, is that they didn't feel, they had this misery that they were sinking into, and he wanted to calm that for them. Jesus was in control, but even more than that, Jesus didn't try to prove that he was in control at first. He didn't try to prove that he was there. He didn't like walk out on the water and just be like, hey guys, watch, and then calm the storm. He wasn't concerned about proving to them that he was in control. He wanted to prove to them that he was with them. He made himself known to them. He was there with them. So Jesus, he makes actually all of the key actions in this story. It says Jesus, he made the disciples get into the boat. Jesus went out to them on the water, that Jesus reached out his hand, that he is the key actor in this story, and he's the key actor in your story, in your storm. Jesus is with us even in the storm, but that doesn't mean that we automatically trust him either. I get that. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that we trust that he's got it under control, but the disciples, they even thought he was a ghost. And they even made him prove that it was him. And even then, Peter still doubted because the wind was strong. So what does doubt look like? I think doubt is seeing the strength of the wind. It's facing unemployment and thinking that you'll never get another job. It's seeing your business fall apart and thinking that it's never going to recover from this. It's experiencing depression and saying that you're never going to get any better. It's feeling the effects of anxiety and telling yourself that there's nothing that's ever going to help. It's facing a difficult diagnosis and thinking that there's no point in going on. But I want us to remember this, that the degree of your faith doesn't determine your fate. The degree of your faith doesn't determine your fate. God will not let you drown just because you doubt. Jesus didn't see Peter and sinking and he said, "Guess you should have trusted me, hey?" It wasn't like that. Jesus reached out immediately. I want you to tell somebody immediately. Tell somebody immediately and grabbed Jesus grabbed Peter and he would not let him sink in the storm. So if you're willing to keep going, Jesus is there saying, well, let's go then. Let's go. I'm ready. I'm reaching out my hand. I'm ready to save you. I'm right here in the middle of your storm. And so when I look at the whole Bible, the one trait that stands out with God is God's faithfulness. He is faithful. He is faithful in the middle of it, that even where we get it wrong, even when we mess up, that he is faithful to us. And we think that means that he's going to calm the storm. We think that being faithful means that God's going to come in and he's going to calm the storm, but that's not it. He's faithful. He says, I'm going to be with you in it, which I think is almost bigger, that he's willing to go through it with you. He's willing to be with you in the middle of that storm. So when you're dead in the water and that danger is real and your misery is worsening, we need to take our eyes off of the danger and look to the captain, to Jesus, who's reaching out his hand, ready to cure your misery, because if we continue in our misery, we may make a decision that we may take us out of misery and into a worse danger. Which is why I think it's important for us to call for help, like Peter did. 100% to Jesus, we need to call for help, but also to those around you. You need to know that you're not alone. Now, when Aaron and I got married, we had no idea we know the first year is hard, but we had no idea how hard the first year of marriage could really be. About 2 months into marriage, I faced a diagnosis that I wasn't sure if I could really handle. But I was diagnosed with bladder cancer at the age of 22. And when that happened, I had to wrestle with it. I had to process it a lot. And every 3 months, we would go in for another checkup, and they would find another tumor, and they would find another tumor, and they would find another tumor every time we went in. And I don't know what happened. I call it the grace of God. But when we moved here, to BC, they did not find any more tumors. There was nothing else. There was no more tumors that were in my body. They couldn't find any more in my bladder at all. There was none there. Now, I want to be vulnerable a little bit with you this morning. And very few people know this, so I want even just everyone out there, I wanted to be vulnerable with you, and I wanted to bring you in on this. But they do yearly scopes with me now at this point, and it usually ends up falling around September, which is on Alinia's birthday, and it fell on her birthday this past September. And we were like, oh, this is going to be great. Like, it's going to fall in there. We're going to be able to celebrate together. It's going to be a great time. We're going to celebrate Alinia's birthday. We'll celebrate that they didn't find anything. So I went there, and it was like super early in the morning. It's like 7:30 in the morning. I had to be in Vancouver. So got up early, as I always do, went straight there, did it. Erin didn't come. She usually does, and she didn't come because I was like, no, it'll be fine. It's good. And we went there. And as we went there, as I went there, I checked in as I normally do, and I went there, they did the scope, and as they went in, they discovered another tumor. This is just in last September. And they discovered another tumor. And they burned it off and dealt with it. It's gone. But as I know these things can keep coming up. And when we were in Calgary, we were at the stage of almost going to chemotherapy. And that was the situation. So now I know in just a month or in a few weeks, I have another test coming out. Because they wanted to look in and see, is there more? Is there more there? Now I've resolved within myself that I know that God didn't cause this cancer, that it's not even a question of did he allow it, but it's saying, I know that God is with me in it. That I know that he is there with me in the middle of it. That I know what it feels like to be dead in the water, to feel like I did everything right and I was somehow left in the storm without power and feeling at the mercy of the wind and the waves. But whether or not that I'm healed, whether or not there is not another tumor or there is, I've already seen the miracle. Because the miracle is that God is with me in it. That's the miracle, that he's there. The miracle is not that I'm holding it together, because some days are harder than others. The reality of it hits me at sometimes. But the miracle is that God is with me in the storm, in the uncertainty, and he is there, he is working, he is faithful, and he has brought me this far. And the only times I feel like he's abandoned me or left me is when I've chosen to focus on the strength of the wind rather than the strength of my God. So in the middle of the storm, I know that I need to see the captain and I need to call out for help. So I want to ask you to be so bold today that if you're dead in the water, will you call for help? Ask God for help. And we know that he may not calm that storm immediately, but he is faithful to be with us in the storm. And we need to remember that the reason we are here today is because God brought us to this moment. He brought you here today. He brought you to this moment in the middle of your storm, and he brought you here no matter what you're facing, whether it's a diagnosis, whether it's just life circumstances you feel out of your control, no matter what you're facing, that he brought you to this moment. He brought you this far through the storm, and he's telling you the storm's only going to last a few hours, but I'm here with you the whole time. We're not going down. I need you to stay with me. Let's go. He's there with you in the storm. God sees you, and he's coming out on the water. He's reaching out his hands, and I want to encourage you, if you haven't already, I want you to let God into your boat. You are the miracle. So I feel like someone needs to hear that today, that you are the miracle. If maybe you're feeling like you've been battered against the waves, like you're dead in the water, like you're fighting to stay afloat, don't miss the miracle that's in your storm. Because you are the miracle. You are walking in it. You are that miracle in the making. God is right there wanting to see you through the storm, and he wants to see you get to the other side, because on the other side, he wants to do more miracles through you and with you. The disciples, when they got to the other side, there was this miraculous healing that happened, that anyone who touched the hem of Jesus' garment, that hundreds and thousands of people, they were healed at a moment's notice. It was one of the greatest. They didn't even have a number for it of how many people they healed. They just said the multitude was healed, because there's so much happening. So Jesus, he wants to bring you to the other side, because he believes that there's more for you, that on the other side of this storm, that it will be over. It will be over soon, and he's going to be with you all the way through it, and he wants to bring you to the other side. He has brought you to it. He will see you through it. So I want you to tell somebody in the chat, God is not done with you yet. He's reaching out his hand in the midst of your doubt, your insecurity, your wavering, your fears, your stress, your anxiety, and he wants to bring you to the other side. He wants to bring you there, and he's with you on the water, on the open ocean, and he wants you to see the other side, because on the other side, there's a miracle there. I want you to remember to call out for help. Call out for help. If you ever want help, even if you want it now, I want you to just throw that in the chat. If you feel comfortable with other people knowing what you need, throw your prayer request in the chat. If you need help, let us know. If you want to keep it more anonymous, you can go to firstav.org/prayer and let us know there. We can keep that anonymous for you. But we want to help. Please call out for help. If you're in the middle of that storm, yes, call out to God, but call out to those around you as well. This community of people willing to reach out to you and come alongside you. And there's one last thing I want to say just before we close here. When God is reaching out his hand, there's only one thing that we need to do, and that's we need to reach out back to him and grab a hold. When God is reaching out, we need to reach out and grab his hand. And when we're dead in the water and we're sinking, we need to grab a hold of that hand. But maybe you're in a position right now where maybe you don't trust. You don't trust God. You don't trust him because of something that happened. You feel hurt or damaged by it. Or maybe you don't trust him because you just never really knew what this was all about. You never knew that there was a God that was like him. And maybe you've even been apathetic in your faith, and you want to renew that commitment that you maybe made one time ago. If that's you today, I want you to have this opportunity right now to start a relationship with Jesus. And I trust you, it is the best decision you will ever make, to have him with you there in the storm, to have you with you there on the mountaintop, to have you there in the highlands and in the heartache, to have him alongside you no matter what. That is such a special bond that will take you through anything, that I trust you will value more than anything. So how do we start that relationship? I think it's right here in the storm. He's been here all along. He's been reaching out, waiting for you to do just that. All we have to do is give our life to him, which I get feels like a big ask, but I would rather trust my life with the one who has the power over the storm, who has the power over everything, who knows me better than anyone. I want to trust it with him, who knows it all, who is present in my struggle and powerful over my circumstance and knows me better than anyone. So if you want to make that decision, whatever platform you're on, I just want you to type yes in the chat. Why yes? Just type yes in the chat. If you want to make that public, you can go right ahead. If you want that to be private, just fill out our digital Connect card and let us know at firstave.org/connect. But I think it's important that you take that decision today and you make that step and declare that. I want you to take that step today. So you can go ahead and do that right now, and I'm gonna lead you in a prayer as we close and we go into a song. But afterwards, I want to encourage you to fill out that Connect card if you haven't already by going to firstave.org/connect. And we want to send you resources to kickstart your life in your faith and your journey with Jesus. So I want you to go ahead and respond to that, but let's pray together. Jesus, we just thank you right now in this moment that you lead us out onto the waters. We thank you that even when there's a storm that we are facing, that you are there in the water, that you are there in our struggle and our weakness, and we thank you. We thank you for our friends today who are responding to you right now and reaching out to you, who are calling out for your help to be with you in their struggle. Will you make yourself so known to them and present in their circumstance? We recognize that we aren't perfect and that we may have made a lot of mistakes, and we're sorry for where maybe we failed you. But we are so thankful that you are a God of mercy, of grace, of forgiveness, and you died so that we may live. So we give our lives to you right now. We surrender to you in the storm. You are the Lord over our lives and the Lord over our storm. We give it to you all right now. And we cannot wait to see what is on the other side. But until then, we choose to look to you for the directives that we need as the captain and the leader of our lives. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Awesome. Church, we're going to lead this in a song. We're going to go into a song right now. But can we just make the chat a party right now? Can we celebrate those who just made that decision today and just say, welcome to the family? We're so glad that you've made this decision. And as one of our pastors here, I want to encourage you again, fill out that Connect card so we can give you some resources to kickstart that relationship with Jesus. But let's sing together in this last song in Highlands.